Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at the Heritage Foundation in our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We take this opportunity also to welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website now or in the future. We would hope that those here in-house would make that last check that cell phones and other noise-making devices have been turned off. It will be most appreciated by those recording the events today. We will post the event on our website for everyone's future reference, and of course our outside listeners are welcome at any time to send questions simply emailing us at speaker@heritage.org. Hosting our discussion today is James Shirk, Senior Policy Analyst in Labor Economics here in our Center for Data Analysis. He joined Heritage in 2006 and researches ways to promote competition and mobility in the workforce, instead of erecting barriers preventing workers from getting ahead. His commentary and analysis has appeared in the Washington Post, New York Post, Business Week, and Roll Call. He has been a guest expert on such networks as CNN, CNBC, and Fox News. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics and mathematics at Hillsdale and received a master's degree in economics with a concentration in econometrics and labor economics from the University of Rochester in New York. Please join me in welcoming James Shirk. James?
Thank you, John. Union membership hit a 97-year low last year. Only 11.2% of Americans now belong to a labor union, fewer even than when President Roosevelt signed the National Labor Relations Act. In the private sector, it's even more dire. Only 6.6%, 1 in 15 workers belong to a union. Now, in large part, this is because while the economy has changed dramatically since the 1930s, unions have not. However, unions don't really see it that way. Unions see that they're offering a product that's perfectly fine, and the only problem is employees and employers aren't buying it. And so the labor movement has attempted to reverse its decline, not by redesigning their offerings, not by making union membership more relevant to 21st century workers, but by making it very difficult for employees and employers to decline their services. This is what we've seen with the National Labor Relations Board's attempt to shorten the union election time frame to less than 3 weeks, forcing workers to decide in as little as 18 days whether or not they want any union. And the attempt to create gerrymandered micro-bargaining units, which allow unions to selectively form unions of their supporters, while excluding employees who do not favor the decision to unionize from the vote and having a say in whether or not their workplace will get unionized. But it's not just at the board level. Even in individual organizing campaigns, unions are moving more and more towards the direction of trying to pressure an employer into accepting union organizing, rather than persuading the employees that a union's in their best interest. And that's not just me saying that. That's the actual words of union organizers. Consider what Joe Crump, who is the former Secretary-Treasurer of the United Food and Commercial Workers Local 951 in Kalamazoo, Michigan, wrote in a publication, the Labor Research Review, designed for a pro-union and, to his side, sympathetic argument. He says, who do we really need to convince of the advantages of being union? Employees or employers? Organizing without the National Labor Relations Board means putting enough pressure on employers, costing them enough time, energy, and money to either eliminate them or get them to surrender to the union. This is what the UFCW calls a pressure campaign. I don't believe we have the luxury of sitting around and hoping that employees, trapped in a union-free environment, will come knocking on our door looking for a solution to their problems. If organizing is the lifeblood of the labor movement, then we have to create our own reality by making our own breaks. And that means focusing on non-union employers and making them pay for operating non-union. One of the concerns organizers might have about waging economic war on an unorganized company is that it might turn employees against the union. I look at it this way. If you had massive employee support, you probably would be conducting a traditional organizing campaign. Besides, the advantages of a pressure campaign in today's environment overwhelm whatever problems you might think of. For example, you don't need a majority or even 30% support among the employees. A few people, inside and out, are all that's necessary. That's the attitude of many modern union organizers, that the way to organize workers is to put enough pressure on their company to force the company to surrender and take the employees out of the decision-making process. Here today to discuss what that looks like, not in theory, but in real life, is Dave Bego, who's the president of Executive Management Services, a company that now employs over 5,000 workers across 38 different states. Since 2006, his company has been locked in a battle with the SEIU, attempting to persuade not Dave's employees, but Dave to surrender his employees' rights to a secret ballot election and to become unionized. We also have here with us to discuss this issue Diana Furcott-Roth, who is a senior fellow with the Manhattan Institute, and before that was the chief economist at the Department of Labor and the chief of staff at President Bush's Council of Economic Advisors, as well as Russ Brown, who's an adjunct fellow at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and a vice president with the Labor Relations Institute. But Dave?
Thank you, James, for having me here today. I appreciate it. Thank all of you for being here today. I want you to know that this isn't something I ever envisioned happening or something that I ever wanted to do, is to be traveling around the country talking about a topic like this. Quite candidly, I was put in this position. I was put in this position by the SEIU, and I was put in this position because of their indiscriminate attack on my company, my employees, my customers, and my family. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story, and I'm going to tell you about a background, because I think the background is important to hear this and understand what really has transpired in what the unions call a corporate campaign, death by 1,000 cuts. When I came out of school, I was going to be a doctor. Didn't quite get there, so I went to work for a company, and I ran plants around the country for them for about 10 years. And the reason this is important is I became a turnaround specialist for them. What I would do is go into the plants and take plants that were failing and make them successful. And the way I did it was appealing to the employees and taking care of the employees and getting the management to understand that employees were our biggest asset. I did that for almost 10 years. And I left because I got tired of traveling around the country. And I went to work for a cleaning company. I became their general manager in Indiana. And I left that guy after 3.5 years because he was the antithesis of what I thought good management should be. He treated people poorly. Quite honestly, those people deserve to be unionized. And when I left that company, it was about 3.5 years after I'd left my previous job, and my wife, who was sitting over here, was scared to death about our future. I decided I was going to start EMS, Executive Management Services. And I do get a little emotional at times, so bear with me. When we started it, I was committed to the fact that we were going to take care of our employees, we were going to make sure they were safe, and we were going to do the right things. We were going to be a company that did business with integrity. And that's how we built the company. We started in 1989. I started cleaning small buildings myself. Barb went back to work as a legal secretary. And as we grew the business, by the mid-90s, we offered our people benefits, including health care, which quite honestly doesn't happen a lot in our industry. But we wanted to do the right thing. And as we continue to grow across the country, by the year 2006, we were in about 33 states and had about 4,000 employees at that time. We were doing the right things. We had one of the lowest turnover rates in the industry. And then all of a sudden, the SEIU appeared. And they sent me a letter saying, we want to help your employees. So I sat down and I talked with them. And what they wanted me to do was sign what's called a neutrality agreement. There'll be some outside you can pick up after the meeting. And in this agreement, if I signed it, I would have to give up my employees' rights to a secret ballot election. And not only that, I would have to give them a list of all my employees and their home addresses, because card check would now be in place, and they would use those name and addresses to go to my employees' homes and intimidate them into signing union cards. And all they had to do is get a bare majority, 50% plus one. In my last meeting with them, I said, I can't sign that. And they looked at me and they said, Mr. Bego, we enjoy conversation, but we embrace confrontation. we're going to attack you, your employees, your customers, and everybody related to you. I said, I'm not going to sign it. It's morally wrong. They started their corporate campaign against my company immediately. Death by 1,000 cuts. They distributed flyers. They were intimidating my employees as they came out of work at night. Quick story, a gal in Indianapolis come out. Every night they'd be standing there trying to force her to support the union, even trying to give her money to bribe her, intimidating her, followed her car, hold her car door shut. They did this for a month, and she kept telling them, no, I'm happy, leave me alone. Finally, one night, one of them went to her and said, look, you're going to be union whether you like it or not, sign the card. And she did. We know this to be true because we have her affidavit from an appeals hearing that we won when we finally beat the SEIU. These type of things went all over the Midwest, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Columbus, Ohio, St. Louis. And daily it was something different. They used clergy people against us. They actually had clergy people shut down buildings by blockading the doors during the day. They had them send letters to our customers telling them how bad we were, how we treated our employees bad, made them use hazardous chemicals and bad equipment. They wrote letters and gave them to the press that were published. They used United States Senator to call one of our largest customers and ask to have our contract canceled unless I signed this agreement. Day after day, these attacks occurred. And you don't hear about this in the press even today. But I'm here to tell you it's true. It's happening to companies across this country every day. And it's sad and it needs to be stopped. The unions have realized that they're dinosaurs and they don't want to compete in the free market. They don't understand that that's what they have to do. Instead, they want to go to intimidation tactics. And they're pushing for card check. And this administration is helping them through the National Labor Relations Board, as James was talking about. You know, they're posting new posting rules that they want, quickie elections, and many, many other regulations. And they're all designed to allow the unions to implement these corporate campaigns and be successful within a short period of time. That's what they're trying to do. That's the end game. That's the goal. And I was going through this, and I realized it. And I was looking in my office window one day, and I had said to myself, it has to stop. We can't let these bullies win. They can't continue to abuse my employees and my customers and my family. We are going to punch the bully in the nose. And we did. But not before they had a few more tricks up their sleeves. I want to show you a couple things. This is a flyer that they distributed in my neighborhood on Halloween of 2007. They used little kids to go around and get candy, trick or treat, and as the little kids got their candy, they would hand these flyers to my neighbors. And then they had union thugs driving up and down the street in cars. Our friends, our neighbors were terrified. These are the things they do. I don't know if you remember the rallies in Wisconsin when they had the recall elections there. But this is downtown Indianapolis against my company. Against my company. It's sad that they have to do these things. And it's wrong. If they had something to sell, the people would listen to them. So on that day, sitting in my office, I decided it was time to go out and talk to my people. It was time to go on the offensive, and we did. I went to every building that was being attacked and sat down and talked to my people about what was going on. And here's the amazing thing when you sit down and talk to people. and I don't care what their background or ethnic origin is. I wanted them to know I cared. And I was in Cincinnati talking to a group of about 40 full-time employees. And I said, I want to talk to you about what's going on, the intimidation that you're seeing, you know, the promises that you're going to get double your wages and you're not going to have to work as hard and all these things. And before I got all that out of my mouth, there was this black lady about mid-50s in the back of the room. She waved her hand at me. And she says, Mr. Bego, may I speak? I had no idea what she was going to say. I said, sure. And she got up and she looked around the room and she says, you need to listen to this man. We might get double our wages in some place like New York, but the cost of living is twice as much. These people treat us right. We have the right chemicals and equipment. They make sure we're safe. They treat us right. You need to listen to Mr. Bego. Everybody in the room got up and applauded her. They understood. They understood. The problem is, they're like most people. They can't stand up against the intimidation factor when people are falling into your cars and holding your car door shut or following you home, pushing their way into your house. So I had to do more than that. And we did. We started taking the same attack. We published this half-page ad in the Indianapolis Star. It said the SEIU, fish or cut bait. But basically what we told them is, if you're so good at what you do, let's have an election and I'll live with results because I am not anti-union. Oh, I forgot to tell you something. All those plants that I turned around, they were all union plants. Every one of them. And the day we did this, we also started filing unfair labor practices or keeping information to file unfair labor practices against the SEIU. And one day in November of 2008, we filed 33 unfair labor practices against the SEIU in one day. They didn't know what to do with it. They were taken back. Nobody had ever challenged them before. Nobody had stood up. You know the sad thing? There's a lot of businessmen and a lot of businesses that won't do it yet today. Because I've had them come and talk to me and say, we agree with you, we agree with what you say in your book, we don't know that we can withstand the onslaught that you were under, and we don't want our name out there. But I'm here today to tell you we need to. Because what's happening, and what's happening in Washington now with the National Labor Relations Board could not only destroy people's rights to a secret ballot election, it could destroy our economy, because if businesses have to go through this, we're going to see loss of jobs, we're going to see loss of productivity, and we're not going to be competitive in the world marketplace. All because people want to force their will on somebody else. This is the article, hopefully you got a copy of that too, of the day that we filed 33 unfair labor practices against the SEIU. They didn't know what hit them. The great thing about this is that the National Labor Relations Board upheld 3 major ones and went to an appeals hearing in Indianapolis, Indiana with an administrative law judge. In his decision, 2 days after it was over, he said that unequivocally EMS was right, that the testimony by the union and their witnesses was unbelievable and contrived. We won the decision, and all the unfair labor practices they had filed against us, by the way, they had filed about 50 against us, were thrown out. 2 days after that, that decision was appealed not by the SEIU but by our United States government. You have to understand the link. The union's money, it's a money pump. It supports certain politicians to get into office, and they use it to pay back the unions. And that's what's happened at the National Labor Relations Board. And that's why they appealed our decision. It took almost a year, but it finally went to the board of the National Labor Relations Board. And we won the decision 3-0. And our people were happy. the sad thing is there's people all over the Midwest with other companies that didn't stand up like we did. And their people are now subjected to this, and they're paying union dues, and they're not making any more money. I'm here today because I truly want to help people. The unions say they want to, but really their goal is survival. And the American public needs to know what's going on. I hope you'll listen. I hope you'll spread the word, because this is wrong, and we need to do what's right for the American people. Thank you very much.
Well, Dave, that was just a heartwarming presentation. I read the book, and the book conveys a lot of what you said, and everybody should buy The Devil is at Our Doorstep. But Dave, what you said makes it just so much more personal. And I'm just an economist. I look at these things just through the prism of data, but I can see that what most Americans are concerned about right now is economic growth and jobs. And the problem is that unions are slowing down that economic growth, and they're slowing down job creation. If you look at labor force participation rates, they're at 1981 levels, at the beginning of the decade where millions of women moved into the workforce. And many, many jobs were created due to the Reagan Revolution. We have 3.2 million fewer jobs than at the start of the recession in December 2007. In President Obama's term, he's created 1.2 million jobs, a total of 1.2 million net jobs. That's about 300,000 a year. That's not enough to keep America going. GDP in the fourth quarter, after all the stimulus spending, was slightly negative. It's probably going to be slightly positive after the new trade figures are incorporated. But what's interesting is that we basically have a laboratory when we look at the right-to-work states and the forced unionization states, the states where people do not have to join a union as a condition of working. And we know that over the past 25 years, not just over the past 4 years, but over the past 25 years, the right-to-work states, the 22 right-to-work states, have created 1.5 times as many jobs as the forced unionization states. Even over the past 4 years, there have been more union jobs created in right-to-work states than in the forced unionization states. If the unions were truly interested in their own best interests, as well as the economy and Americans' best interests, they would have every state be a right-to-work state, because they'd probably get a lot more increases in union membership. Well, the problem is that an anti-business agenda, such as President Obama's, lowers the job creation of union members and non-union members alike. The union membership rate declined by 1.1 percentage points in the 8 years of President Bush. It declined by the same amount in the 4 years of President Obama. President Obama's policies are leading to a faster rate in the decline of union membership than President Bush. And James mentioned the data before. Total 11.8% overall to 11.2%. Private sector 6.9% union membership to 6.6% in 2012. Government even declined 37% unionized to 36%. So if you look at what President Obama has done, look at, for example, what he did to Boeing when Boeing wanted to expand in South Carolina. These were union jobs in South Carolina. They wanted to open a second plant because they were having too many orders for Dreamliners. And once they get this little battery problem fixed, they will have those Dreamliners rolling out again. But President Obama, Leif Solomon, the acting general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board, didn't want them to open that second plant in South Carolina. Once the plant was built, they didn't want them to use that second plant in South Carolina. And that was thousands of jobs in a relatively poor region of South Carolina, north of Charleston. They wanted them to open the second plant in Washington State. Well, what that means is that any company wanting to come to the United States, any company thinking of opening, is not going to open a plant in a forced unionization state, because they know that if they ever want to move to a right-to-work state, or if they want to open a second plant in a right-to-work state, they're going to have problems from the National Labor Relations Board. So that worked against creating more union jobs as well as more non-union jobs. If you look at the Keystone Pipeline, which President Obama vetoed, that would have created tens of thousands of union jobs in construction. But the president vetoed it. It would have also created a lot more jobs in the Gulf of Mexico for our refineries. We have the most efficient refineries in the world, but oil supplies from Venezuela and Mexico are dwindling. We need that oil from Canada to be shipped down through these pipelines to our refineries in the Gulf so that our workers who are working these long, dangerous jobs with long hours in the Gulf of Mexico have more oil to refine, which, by the way, some of which we can export. Instead, the oil from Canada is going to go west to China. It's going to be shipped over to China. The Chinese are going to be able to use it. We're not going to be able to use it. Just a couple more examples, because I know it's Russ's turn. If you look at what the EPA has done to the coal mines, the coal regulations, those are costing union jobs in the coal industry. The new regulations mean that over 100 coal-fired power plants have closed down since January 2010. And in an evaluation of a major carbon rule, EPA had no costs for the carbon rule on the coal industry. Why? Because they assumed in the cost-benefit analysis that no new coal-fired plant would ever be built. No coal-fired plant ever built, therefore no cost to coal, right? Simple for the EPA, but not so simple for those coal miners who are losing their jobs. If we look at taking over GM and Chrysler, which President Obama did, and then he gave the assets to the United Auto Workers rather than to the legitimate creditors of GM and Chrysler. Again, that doesn't help the conditions for investment here in the United States. If people know that laws are going to be overturned, that their investments are going to be expropriated, they don't invest in the United States. They're going to go invest somewhere else, such as Singapore or other countries where they think that their credit is going to be preserved. So I just wanted to end with saying that George Orwell would have just loved the terms that President Obama and unions use. So Dave talked about the neutrality agreement. Well, it wasn't a neutrality agreement. It gave all the information to the unions. It took away the right to a secret ballot. The Employee Free Choice Act, it's not free choice. That would have taken away the right to a secret ballot in union elections and imposed mandatory arbitration on unions and firms. Finally, official time. I wrote an article about official time in today's realclearmarkets.com. Official time is time that government workers spend not working for the government, but working for their unions. And there are 35 people at the Department of Transportation who spend all their days not doing anything for the federal government, but only working for their unions. 17 of these are air traffic controllers. 16 of these air traffic controllers are being paid six-figure salaries. And for some reason, this is called official time. George Orwell would have loved it. And he would have also loved Dave's book, which all of you should buy. Thanks so much for inviting me to speak.
Well, let me first start off by saying, Dave, I cannot tell you how important it is that you've chronicled these atrocious events that's taken place in your life. Outside the Beltway, for a business to make it is hard enough. And American businessmen going against these type of odds is unbelievable. You went toe-to-toe with the thugs. You have fared very well. The battle goes on. Dave and I have very similar backgrounds, two different businesses, two different parts of the country, but I too was a businessman with with quite a few employees, about 1,200, and the unions came after me. Now, in my particular case, instead of chronicling and writing a great book to spread the word, when I left that business, I went to work taking on unions on individual bases and for companies, which is what I do today, and working on policy itself. And I see every day the playbook that is used by the SEIU and other unions to force businesses into unionization with or without an election. And we know about the playbook. It came out not that long ago in a Sodexo hearing. And it actually advocates criminal actions. And it talks about the death by 1,000 cuts. It's unbelievable that something like that can even be allowed to exist without anyone taking any action on it. Now, I want to talk about some of the social justice groups that are out there that are really nothing but unions by any other name. You know, there's Jobs with Justice, which is a multi-union coalition. There's Justice for Janitors, which is an SEIU group. There's Mi Familia Vote, which is a SEIU-funded group. There's the NGO War on Want. These things go on and on. Now, the neutrality agreement, and let me just say this, their mission on all of these groups is very simple. It's name and shame. And truth and justice has absolutely nothing to do with it. They work hard laws and soft laws to basically, what's the word I'm looking for, defame an employer that goes against them. Their mission, like I said, is name and shame, and it doesn't have anything to do with justice. I want to give you an example of a neutrality agreement, and actually it's out there. If you look on page 3 of that neutrality agreement, the paragraph 4, it says the employer will not file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board for an election in connection with any demand for recognition by the union. In other words, you can't challenge them. You just have to take their word for it. And the employer is left completely out of the loop. Forget freedom of association. That's out the window. These neutrality agreements are actually taking place even further out than that. They're going across the pond with some of these neutrality agreements through what's called international framework agreements. I'll give you an example of a company. I think most people have heard of a company called G4S. It's a security company. During the Olympics in London, they were the company that was responsible with providing most of the security for the event. They had a subsidiary here in the United States called Wackenhut. And there's some really legendary cases with Wackenhut taking on the SEIU, the Union of Culprit. Well, they didn't get a whole lot of ground at the time. G4S, what they did was work a triangular situation. G4S, of course, is owned by a company out of London. What took place was G4S had a contractor working for them in South Africa. They started doing protests claiming racism and poverty wages in South Africa, started putting pressure on the corporate headquarters in London, got language in an international framework agreement that went down to neutrality here in the U.S., and in 2009, Wackenhut recognized the SEIU through card check agreement. A lot of companies in the U.S. have had these international agreements. We know of Deutsche Telekom and T-Mobile have had that very similar situation. Sodexo that we talked about a while ago, H&M, the retailer, and UPS. It actually happened in reverse where the Teamsters leveraged their 99-year relationship here in the United States to force recognition in Turkey for a contractor. Anyway, in short, what we have to do is on a policy level, we've got to make sure that we allow the employee to always have that election. You can't force an employer to go into a campaign against a union. You don't, that'd be unreal. But we can always make sure the employee at least has a say-so somewhere in this situation. Anyway, that's all I've got on this.
Well, thank you, Russ. We'll open it to questions from the audience in just a minute, but I'm going to take my moderator's prerogative to ask the first question. And it's going to be for you, Dave, although if Russ and Anna want to chime in. But again, in going through that article from the UFCW organizer, it was written in the 90s when they were first starting to pioneer the practice of these pressure campaigns. And he was writing, and again, I'm quoting from him here, "My local, UFCW 951 in Michigan, subscribes to this policy," and the policy he's talking about is bypassing the NLRB, "by defining successful organizing in one of two ways. Either a ratified signed collective bargaining agreement with a previously non-union employer, or a significant curtailment of a non-union operator's business, including shutting the business down. Neither of these outcomes will occur by relying on the National Labor Relations Board." And so the union's goal, and he's quite explicit in the article, and he goes on to describe a successful campaign they waged to bankrupt a local non-union grocery store, Family Foods, that used to operate in Kalamazoo, is to shut down non-union operators' businesses if they can't persuade them to go on with neutrality and card check and bypass the secret ballot vote. Now, in the 1990s, they were convinced that the National Labor Relations Board wasn't going to be the entity that would help them do that. And I'm wondering, Russ, Dave, if you have any thoughts on what the National Labor Relations Board has been proposing and their attempts to change the rules, and how would that impact businesses like you and employees who might not be persuaded of the need to purchase a union services?
Well, it's actually pretty simple. During these corporate campaigns, the death by 1,000 cuts is designed to get the employer to cave and sign the neutrality agreement. And right now, they need more tools to get employers to cave, especially after we won against the SEIU, because some people have learned. And with people like Russ's organization and others, National Right to Work, we've got them represented in the back of the room here, Don Luce, you know, they're helping people fight through these situations. But here's the key, and one of the things that you probably don't know about in the original Employee Free Choice Act, which is also known as card check, is that in there was a third provision. The first one was eliminating the secret ballot election. The second was mandatory arbitration. But the third was employer fines. You say employer fines, what's that? Well, it's very simple. If you as an employer were found guilty of an unfair labor practice, they want to attach a $10,000 to $20,000 fine to that. Now, if you were a businessman and they started throwing all these unfair labor practices out there, and they do, like spitballs on a wall, and some of them are going to stick, how many could you afford? And that would have been one of their pieces of leverage, to go to the owner of the business and say, you know, if you just sign this neutrality agreement, we'll withdraw all those unfair labor practices and those fines will go away. These are the type of things the National Labor Relations Board, through regulation changes and overturning previous decisions, is trying to accomplish, like their posting rule, quickie elections, you know, mini units, micro units. This is all designed to give the unions an upper hand in the corporate campaigns.
Well, if, Dan and Russ, if you don't have any comments, are there any?
Well, I have one small comment. I think that people don't know. We know what the posting rule is. We know quick elections. We know specialty health care. But can you say a few more words about what these are for people who don't know, who might be listening?
Yeah, on the
Persuader rule, for example.
Yeah, well, the persuader rule, that's through the Department of Labor. What that is, and we're actually going through it right now. We have another campaign with another union. But if you use outside consultants or attorneys to help you win an election, you have to disclose that information, who and how much and all that. On the flip side of that, the unions don't have to do that. It's all designed to put pressure on you, okay? Posting rules. They want to post in application rooms of businesses across the country that employees have the right to be unionized or form a union. Conversely, nothing about you have the right not to be unionized.
And that was overturned. That was declared illegal, right?
That's right.
They didn't have to put that.
That was overturned. And then you have the quickie elections where today by law it's supposed to be within 42 days. The unions want to get it down to 7 to 10 days. And the reason is because they've already gone out and intimidated these people into signing union cards. And they know if they can petition and do it in 7 to 10 days, the company won't have enough time to sit down and say, look, just because you sign the union cards, doesn't mean that's the way you have to vote. And I'll give you a case in point. We've had one election, and that was down in southern Ohio at a steel mill. And it was with a different union, and they petitioned, and we said, fine, we're going to do it in 42 days, just like the law demands. Here's the interesting point. Each week I went down and I sat and talked to the employees. In my first talk with them, I said, please understand something. Just because you signed a card to agree to an election, and by the way, the union only needs 30%. Just because you sign a card doesn't mean you have to vote that way when you go in the ballot box. That's what's so precious about the secret ballot election. When I made those comments, you could just see it was like a weight taken off the employees' shoulders in the rooms. They just, and afterwards, half of them came up to me and said, thank you for telling us that. We didn't know that. The only reason we signed the election cards is because the union thugs were following us around in the plant, intimidating us, and we just gave up and signed them. That's why all this is so important, that we expose this and we make sure people are protected.
And isn't it amazing that the two recess-appointed members of the National Labor Relations Bureau, their recess appointments were nullified by the U.S. Court of Appeals. So if they are no longer are on the National Labor Relations Board, that means just one person, and it has to be closed down until people can be properly appointed. And that means also that all these rules that they promulgated last year are not legal either, because the recess appointees were not legal.
Let me comment on one other thing. He also mentioned micro units. This is another thing by the unions, that traditionally when unions approach a company, they have to get a collection of employees that share what is called a common interest. And with micro units, they are going against what is traditionally considered common interest, and they're carving out different sections of employees. And if you can put it in the terms of, say, a department store, where every clerk in the store has the same title, has the same pay wage, the same benefits, they share the same lunchroom and all of that. In the micro unit, for example, they may only take the people in the shoe department and the sporting goods department, leaving everybody else out and only having elections for those, giving them what is called a toehold, and working on the rest of the group as they go. So it's they're really carving up companies as well with these situations.
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the quickie elections, because this is what's so important about this one. We had 26 people working at this particular facility. If it had been 7 to 10 days and I wouldn't have had the chance to talk to these people about, number one, they had a right to a secret ballot election, number two, they could vote their conscience, we probably would have lost. As it turned out, with 42 days, we had continued meetings with them, we won the election 2-1. It's because people understood their rights. And that's despite the fact, by the way, that one of the employees stood up one day and says, Mr. Bego, we appreciate you coming and talking to us. I wish you could debate the union. I said, well, I don't think that's going to happen. I said, they don't like it that I get a chance to talk to you anyway. He says, well, that's no big deal. They have pizza, wing, and beer for us 2 nights a week down at the local pub. I said, I wish I could do that for you, but I can't.
That would be an unfair labor practice.
Yes, it would. Against us, not
Yes,
just the union.
yes.
It would be an unfair labor practice if you did it.
Yeah. You can't give the employees anything of value to. And if the Employee Free Choice Act had passed, an employer who did something like that would have faced a $10,000 fine, which would have entirely disappeared if the employer agreed to shut up and not saying anything to his workers. But are there any questions in the audience? Matt? And if you could stand up, we've got the microphone coming. If you could say your name and your affiliation.
Matt Patterson, CEI. Can you talk about, Mr. Bego, the costs that your company incurred fighting this in time and money?
Well, just in attorney fees, we spent around $1 million in attorney fees. How much in personal time and management time and other thing is, we've never sat down and calculated, but I'm sure you could double it or more.
I'm curious, you took this on.
If you could stand up, sorry, and identify yourself.
My name is Justin Wilson. I'm with the Center for Union Facts. We get a lot of very small business owners calling us. In fact, I got an email while I was sitting here from one asking for advice when they get approached by a labor union. Usually the first thing I tell them is don't do anything until you've consulted with an attorney. Only because there's just so many pitfalls associated with unfair labor practices at the moment that someone wants to just, a lot of people say, I'm just going to go talk to my employees and sort this out, as if that's so simple. I'm curious, it sounds like you personally took on a lot of the task with talking with your employees. You obviously employed lawyers to do this. Did you run into pitfalls in terms of what you could say and how you could, avoiding interrogation and avoiding a whole variety of potential unfair labor practice charges? And do you think that really sort of factored? Was your choice to do it personally, did that overwhelm the potential risk of doing it without actually employing?
Well, we did use the attorneys, and they were present when I met with the employees. But I felt it was important that my employees knew how I felt. And I told them all the time, if they want an election and they have an election and you decide you want to be union, that's fine. But I don't believe in people being intimidated into something they don't want to do. And I talked to them about these things and about the reality of the situation. And I have to tell you, I came away from 0 meetings feeling like that we had failed in our message. And it didn't hurt us with more unfair labor practices.
Cliff Smith, I'm a former Hill staffer. Anyhow, I had a quick question that just shows me probably how I know just enough to be ignorant. So I know that the Labor Relations Board only has 1 member functionally right now because of the court decision. But if the unions are using this...
Well, no, the two have refused, the 2 recess appointees have refused to step down, so they continue to operate.
I guess they probably don't have any legal significance, I guess I should say then. But if their whole strategy right now is to get around the Labor Relations Board with these agreements, how exactly does this process affect each other? I guess I don't understand how this interplays. Can someone explain that to me?
Well, I'll start, and then if other people want to chime in. I mean, there's 2 aspects to it. One, the National Labor Relations Board has a lot of tools. I mean, things that you would think ought to be common sense in an organizing drive. Like Justin just mentioned, interrogation. If you're to go to your employers and say, I think I've been a good boss. What's wrong? What's wrong with the workplace that you're considering joining a union? You'd think it would be just a common sense question an employer would be allowed to ask, how have I screwed up? But it's not. That's an unfair labor practice. Or things like, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you guys didn't like the health benefits plan. We'll overhaul it to make sure we're you're covering the conditions you want covered. Well, you can't do that. That's called promising. There's all these sorts of things you'd sort of intuitively would assume would be okay during an organizing drive that you're just not allowed to do. And so employers, they we go through and you're going to trip over these things unless you've got good counsel, unless you've hired a good lawyer. And then the unions will come up and throw everything against the wall. And press conference, employer XYZ is accused of committing 500 unfair labor practices, and doesn't this prove what an awful rotten guy is, and no one should ever trust him or listen to what he has to say. So they're very good at using the National Labor Relations Board sort of as it now stands. But what they've concluded is that that's just not enough, that the board as it now stands isn't sufficient. And so what they've been trying to do is expand the powers of the board to do more things, like shorten the election time frame to 7 to 10 days. And the initial rule they proposed would allow them to shorten it to somewhere around 18 days. And then they want to get it down even below that. Or the micro units, where there's actually a department store in New York where the unions are organizing not simply all, they could organize all the hourly clerks. They're not doing that. They could organize just the clerks in the shoe departments. No, they're not doing that. They could organize the clerks in the women's shoes department, but they're not doing that. They're trying to form a union of the clerks in the women's shoes departments on the 2nd and 5th floors. Well, is that designed with the best interest of the workers, or is that simply trying to form a unit of the people you think you can form, and the other workers who think that a union might not be the best thing for their store get shut out of the department? They're trying to expand the rules to do things like that. And to the extent that the current organizing process doesn't allow them to do that, they're trying to overhaul it to make it more conducive, which is why why they push for the illegal recess appointments. They knew it was going to be a legal fight, but they also knew that the Senate was extremely unlikely to confirm these nominees otherwise. I mean, one of them has been named a defendant in a RICO violation. That before he was on the board, he came directly from being general counsel of the operating engineers, and has just been named a defendant in a RICO violation, alleging that he was helping to cover up a misspending of money from a union trust fund that was supposed to be going to workers' job training, and instead was allegedly being misspent for the benefit of the guy running the trust fund. That guy wasn't going to get confirmed by the Senate. They knew he'd never get past a filibuster. And so that's why you've seen the pressure. Put these guys on the board anyway, the guys who know what the agenda is, who are going to recraft the rules to benefit the organizers. I don't know if you had anything to add to that, Dave.
No, he's exactly right. This is all designed to give the unions leverage, okay?
Sorry, the part I'm still confused on then is you were talking about them trying to get you to sign an agreement that bypassed the Labor Relations Board altogether. If they are so much on their side anyway, what is their purpose in so doing? And how does the board's current status affect that?
Well, right now, it's hard for them to get some people like me to sign the agreement. There's not enough leverage for them to do it. A lot of people won't do it. Now, having said that, there's a lot of businesses that will. But what their goal is, they want to force unionize every business. And to do that, they need more leverage. For people like me and other companies that have said no, they want to be able to go out and fire these unfair labor practices up there. Now we're facing all these fines and things like that, or they go to the quickie election, things like that, that they can win quickly, and they can sit down in front of you and put the neutrality agreement down there and say, now are you going to sign it? And they'll pull those fines back on that. So it's all about leverage, and that's what they're trying to do. Because they know there's a certain percentage of businesses that aren't going to sign the agreement up front. Okay? Does that help?
And what's interesting is how little success they have had, how the number of union members every year has been declining.
And you also have to remember, as far as elections go, unions know that their best day of support is the day the petition is filed. They traditionally lose support from that day on.
Can you describe what the petition is more clearly?
And this kind of goes to talking about what I was going to talk about next. You were talking about the neutrality agreement and gaining recognition through what's called card check. A card, it's usually a little 3x5 index card. It has legal language on it. And basically that language says, I hereby authorize this union to represent me for the purpose of collective bargaining and wages, benefits, and other work conditions. Print name, sign date, and usually ask for a lot of other personal information. That is a legally binding document where you as an individual are turning your right to represent yourself for anything over to the union. They now represent you. Their interests are very much different than yours. They don't talk about that sort of thing. Anyway, to bring an election, they have to get a minimum of 30% of the cards from what's called the appropriate bargaining unit, and as we've talked about, they're dividing those up any way that's beneficial to them at this point in time. Once they have 30% or more of those cards signed, they turn those over to the National Labor Relations Board, and that creates a petition for an election. And the election is to take place at this point in time 42 days, no more than 42 days from the day that petition is filed. Traditionally right now, unions file that petition on a Friday at 5 o'clock and it gets faxed to the employer on that date. So they go home for the weekend, they come, they find it sitting on their floor by the fax machine, they pick it up, look at it, and they're already 3 days down. They lost Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, so 39 days at that point.
But then when the actual election comes, they don't have to vote yes for the union. So that's why you were saying that the day the petition is filed is the union's best day.
That's
because
correct.
not all the petitions result in a vote in favor of union representation. Most of them do not. Or it's about 50-50, isn't it right now?
About 50 to 60%, somewhere in that range.
We've got time for one last question.
Ivan Osorio, so it's it's a question for the panel. On the legislative policy side, there are things that state lawmakers can do to address these kinds of problems, such as secret ballot protection laws, laws protecting employees' private information, not exempting unions from anti-stalking laws. So why don't you comment on how effective do you think these can be, and is there anything else that states could do to prevent these kinds of abuses?
You mean other than right to work?
Well, yeah.
Right to work is the biggest thing. I mean, but, you know, Indiana went right to work this year, or last year. You know, I'm from Indiana. Michigan went this past year also. But you look at states like Wisconsin that have severely handicapped some of the collective bargaining that the unions can do, and given people a chance to opt out in that, and they're headed towards right to work. And I think you're going to see more states where that happens. What we need to do is help get the message out so all Americans understand what's going on behind the scenes, that the unions, and I don't say the unions because really it's not the rank and file, okay? It's the big labor bosses, okay? They're headed towards extinction and they're trying to survive. And what we have to do is educate Americans to the intimidation factor that's going on and expose this stuff so that the governments on the state level and the national level, national right to work would be great to have, understand what's going on, you know, both parties, and they come together and protect the rights of everyday Americans, not people that are giving them money to get reelected.
And so we can see that when we have a laboratory of 50 different states, we can see that the right to work states are doing better than the others. So we can see that this kind of legislation that you're talking about is extremely effective. We can also observe that Americans are moving from forced unionization states to right to work states because Americans are most concerned with having jobs and with economic growth. Steve Moore has documented this in his series of books co-authored with Art Laffer called Rich States, Poor States. We saw it in the last census where right-to-work states gained congressional seats, lost from forced unionization states. So the process is going on, and we can observe it through data.
I would like to say something about right to work in this. For a lot of our audience here today, I know this is an elementary thing, but I do work with companies and their employees during these campaigns, and there are some wildly different views about what right to work actually is. So for the audience out there, right to work is this simple. In a right to work state, you do not have to be a member of a union as a condition of employment, and thus meaning you do not have to pay union dues. You know, there's a little more to it, but that's the basics. It's that simple.
And union dues can be very substantial. I was talking to one checkout cashier at Safeway in the district. He was wearing a United Food and Commercial Workers button, and I asked, well, how do you like the union? And he said, well, they take about as much out of my paycheck as is taken out in taxes. Well, admittedly, he was a pretty low-wage worker, but that's how he saw it. I said, well, why don't you find another job? He said, if I could, I would. So there's obviously concern, these dues that are flowing from these low-paying workers and mid-level workers to very well-paid presidents of unions, and these are all available online, the data, how much the union bosses work from the LM2 forms.
Yeah, I'd also, right to work is a great policy. We strongly support it at Heritage. Beyond right to work, I mean, sort of beyond the obvious, I think you had some very good suggestions there. There's a number of states where unions have exemptions from anti-stalking laws that you can't stalk anyone and follow them to their home unless you're engaged in a labor dispute with them. Then you can do it. So Pennsylvania, a number of other states, special exemption from anti-stalking laws just for unions. And that allows the unions to put a lot of pressure, not just on employers like Dave, but on the individual employees. And I think those exemptions ought to be removed. There's also a lot of exemptions from the anti-extortion laws for unions. So there's another RICO violation being prosecuted in upstate New York near the Syracuse area, where you had basically the building and construction trade departments, allegedly, were going and doing things like pouring sand into the gas tanks of the heavy cranes and the operating equipment in a lot of non-union workplace operators, and basically telling the guys, hey, you got to hire union workers to work on these projects, or we're going to see to it the project doesn't get built. And so it's a RICO violation being filed right now, but the unions basically has been saying, but we have an exemption from the federal anti-extortion laws, and you can't prosecute us for doing this. And the kicker is they're right. Now, they may be prosecuted under the state anti-extortion statutes, but that's something at the state level. States could clarify that being involved in a union dispute does not exempt you from extortion laws, and that you're not allowed to extort someone and threaten someone and threaten their business and their livelihood in order to get them to join a union. So I think toughening up the anti-blackmail and anti-extortion laws at the state level is a very obvious policy that would protect a lot of employees and employers from this sort of abuse. But with that, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Dave, very much for sharing your story with us. And Dave will be outside signing copies of his book, and copies of The Devil at Our Doorstep will be available for sale. And I encourage everyone interested in these issues to buy a copy.
It makes a great birthday present, a great anniversary. All buy one.
Could I say one last thing about The Devil at Our Doorstep? This isn't just about my story. I didn't want to be an author. I felt compelled to help everyday Americans. In my first book, The Devil at My Doorstep, that was our general battle. This one includes stories of people across the country that read my first book and wrote me about their stories. And it talks about employees in California who are intimidated by the SEIU, union workers in Michigan and in other states. And I'm tickled to death that the story is getting out finally, and that the grassroots movement is actually coming from people who are union workers that are tired of being abused and intimidated by their labor bosses and their money being used for politics that they don't agree with. So I hope you'll buy it. I hope you'll tell everybody, because I'm prejudiced because it's my book, but I think every American should read the book. Thank you.